Crimson Tides of Tethyr is an interesting second part to a loosely tied together trilogy that features the premium module Tyrants of the Moonsea as the last chapter. I've already reviewed the first part of this trilogy, Siege of Shadowdale, and I'll leave a link down below to that review so that you can check it out as well. You can carry over your character from the first part, even though Crimson Tides is a self-contained story and doesn't require you to have played the first. It was originally created all the way back in 2005, but has been updated. Also to note, if you visit the creator's Patreon, which I'll leave a link below as well, he gives an update on the status of the two modules Crimson Tides and Siege of Shadowdale, and says that he's going to further expand upon their design with additional story and content. They're both slated for re-release sometime around the end of the year, which is really exciting news. As for the current Crimson Tides, this is a fairly lengthy module sitting at around 15 to 25 hours to complete. Again, I used my rogue for this build. It just made sense to carry over my hero from the first adventure, especially since the gear given in that first module was sparse and I knew it wouldn't come in overpowered. Now, there is a wide range of abilities that are useful in this module, be it influencing dialogue options or disarming traps. There really wasn't any puzzles to figure out, and it seemed to lean heavy on combat. I think it's also best to note that some of the mature content is nothing way over the top. As for the alignment, that's a little bit tricky, and I'll speak about that a little bit later. But before we dive too far down this rabbit hole, remember, if you like this style of content, to give a thumbs up and subscribe. Let's dive in. Let me lead this off by saying that Crimson Tides really gets going early with a cutscene that shows a series of interesting developments. Two soldiers fighting on a battlefield against monsters, and once slain, they speak of their leader and confused about their involvement in this upcoming conflict. Now that in turn switches us to a throne room where a similar scene plays out between the royal court and questions of why this mercenary group is even being brought in, which of course is talking about the Crimson Guard. The answer is simple. The people are desperate and in need of trained soldiers, and this mercenary group really fits the bill. All this leading us to what is transpiring: a nation on the brink of war and about to be invaded. Meanwhile, we are introduced back to our hero character, who seems to have stumbled into the capital city in search of adventure, and I have to say that we can find it here no problem, as it doesn't take long to become entangled into the army that is moving to stop the invading forces. This mod is a little different than the average sword and board adventure. There is a lot of intrigue, dialogue, with some interesting twists and turns. While I do understand it would be very difficult in the Aurora engine to stage large-scale conflicts and have our hero wage through the middle of it, the way we follow the army actually works. We are the spearhead of the group and encountering what is happening before the foot soldiers. I kinda dig this. It allows for the module to flow well enough given the circumstances. While I think anyone would really like full-scale combat in a story setting of this magnitude, we instead must circumvent obstacles presented before us so that the army can continue on. Not to say that there isn't eventually large-scale scenes of fighting going on, but it's used sparingly and it works well enough. I also really enjoyed the locations of this one, nothing too elaborate or overwhelming. I think it's an interesting touch because sometimes you can get lost in the weeds exploring elaborate cave systems that could contain their own city underground, or wizard towers that seem to have floor after floor until you're certain that it must be equal to the Eiffel Tower in height. That's not to say that I don't enjoy those locations fully expanded or want to see them in RPG settings, but in this particular module, it works well enough just to focus on the main story, which in turn leads to side quests being very sparse, and the ones that are integrated and feel part of the story being told. Speaking of which, the Crimson Tide really invests in the storyline, and what comes out is this action adventure that takes many hours to complete, but never once do you feel like it's being fluffed up. When I played against the Cult of the Reptile God, I felt like I was playing over at a buddy's house late at night in one of those awesome D&D sessions. Here, I felt like I was reading a really good book on a Sunday afternoon, with one exception, being able to control the main hero. All that aside, there were some moments that I think should be considered when playing this. The first in the series that I reviewed, Siege of Shadowdale, had a couple sweet loot drops in it, but overall the equipment was very sparse. When I went into this one, I didn't feel that I was overgeared one bit, and initially there was a little bit of a power struggle where the content had a lot of challenge, especially if one doesn't have a way to dispel invisibility with a reliable tool, so there's a little bit of a spoiler. Eventually, this all panned out as the equipment drops started coming fast and furious. While I feel there were some OP bosses, they weren't unbeatable, especially with the large amount of gear given to use at your disposal. I do think that it was almost too much and definitely a huge contrast from that first module played in the trilogy. Also, in this module, there are some really neat longsword drops and katanas, so if that's a build that allows for those, then expect some major upgrades. As I mentioned earlier, the alignment is kind of tricky. Your actions do play a role, and alignment will shift due to your actions. I think this is important to keep in mind. I did find it easy to move towards chaotic. I just think it's best to walk in knowing that certain actions could move the dial on your character. While I don't think it's enough to cause a full switch in alignment, if you do carry this character over to other modules, that might be a factor to weigh in on. Personally, it helps seal the deal for more immersion, and I enjoyed seeing it in this module. Lastly, one more big positive to this is the music selection, so I'll go ahead and give you a little sample piece right here. Crimson Tides of Tethyr is a really great mod, with some major improvements coming later this year. As it is now, it's well worth a play and definitely a top tier story module that ranks as my personal favorite in the category as of right now. Really, it comes down to if you like to see conflict between nations, tension and drama, and some interesting twists and turns, then I think you'll really enjoy this one and you should check it out. Well, that's it for this. Remember to like and subscribe for more content, but I'm going to go ahead and sign out. Have a great day gaming. Later.